Today we have four distinguished guests coming from the government, from financing organizations, and from network organizations. And I will introduce each of them one by one before to give them the floor. So we will start today with, on the left of the table, Lowrie, who is the director of the START Network in the UK. He has led the START Network since 2010, enabling NGOs to realize groundbreaking innovation in the humanitarian sector. Sean has over 26 years of experience in the humanitarian sector. He worked in several countries, including Côte d'Ivoire, Liberia, Swaziland, Kenya, DRC, and he has a BSc from the Queen University in Canada in mechanical engineering, as well. Yeah, no, that's it. I was reading another one, but I wasn't sure about the acronym. Then we will hear here on my direct left from Aline Buysschaert. Aline is a senior associate at Quoits Invest. Quoits Invest is a firm specialized on impact investing and innovative finance. And she was partly involved in the setting up of the Humanitarian Impact Bond that was set up with the ICRC and the Belgian government a few, I think 2 years ago. And she will speak more about that. Previously, she worked on several projects with different organizations, and she holds a MA in Applied Economics from the Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium, as well as MA in International Development from the Johns Hopkins University in the US. We will then hear from Peter van Acker here. Peter van Acker represents the government of Belgium. He is the director of Humanitarian Transitional Development and Governance within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development Cooperation. He has been in this position since 2017. And before that, he was also the head of the Humanitarian Aid Unit, and he was also very much involved in the setting up of the Humanitarian Impact Bond, which I just spoke over, and he will also give a special attention to that. He was also the Belgian Sherpa during the Grand Bargain negotiations, and prior to that, he has been in posting in several countries, including Uganda. Last but not least, we will hear from Jess Camburn. Jess will speak, so the three first speakers will speak more about innovative finance, how to finance the innovation sector, and Jess will speak more about how to finance innovation. So we reverse the word, but it's something a bit different, but it's very interesting as well. So Jess is the director of Ehlra since 2009. Previously, she worked, she led humanitarian development programs in several countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe. So I will give the floor. So we'll start now with Sean. So each presenter will speak for about 10 minutes. Please write down your questions. We won't take questions right after the presentations. We will take them after the four speakers made their presentations. And we will try to finish at 2 p.m. So, Sean, the floor is to you.
Thank you. We turn to the slide. So I have a lot to say, and what I will try and do is say as little as possible. I want to show you two films and hope that the real conversation can happen after the four presentations. So I'm the director of the START Network. It's a group of 42 national and international NGOs, some of whom are in the room today, supported by 7 different governments, including the government of Belgium, for which we're very grateful. What I would like to talk with you about is 3 innovations in the financing space. The first is the START Fund. The START Fund is like an NGO SURF. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, technically it's a multi-donor global pooled fund. It's early, it's fast, and it's agile. And those are our niche areas, if you like. We entered the market in pooled funding by talking with governments about gaps in where the financial architecture now delivers funding to operational NGOs. And we argued that we needed better funding in underfunded small crises. Most of our funding goes to things that get on the front page of the newspaper. Spikes in chronic situations where the existing architecture takes too long to deploy resources. And the third, in forecasts of impending crises. Next slide, please. So this is our niche. This is a time horizon. You can see that the START Fund tries to deploy resources within 72 hours of being triggered. We're actually much faster than that. We're 62 hours on average this year, I believe. And our grants are 45 days in length. Reporting and learning happens another 50. So the whole cycle is about 60 days in length. And often it takes just that much time for the larger pool funding mechanisms to deploy resources. So that's our niche. It's early, often before the crisis occurs. It's very fast, so when it is triggered, it happens very quickly, and it's agile. And I'd like to explain a bit more about that. It's collectively managed and owned by NGOs, and we have an ethic of continually learning from experiences. So we feel the mechanism is continuously evolving. If you go to the next slide, please. This shows how fast it is. But I guess we divide the decision making about the fund into two ways. So we deploy the resources globally, but we make project selection at the national level. And so this enables us to ensure that either frontline aid workers who know the context and know the needs, or local communities can influence the decision making around how the funds are deployed. So we feel that it entered the market in this early, fast, and agile way, but perhaps its greatest benefit to the system may be, and it provides a mechanism for localizing in a way that is difficult with other more centrally driven global mechanisms like the SURF. If you go to the next slide, this is what I mean about learning from experience. So what we discovered a couple years in was that we could have deployed resources before a crisis occurs, but our organizations are risk averse, and it's hard to help our constellation of stakeholders know how to put money in advance. And so if you show this video, this will explain the anticipation window.
In the past, we are a network of NGOs, and we believe that the current system providing humanitarian aid is no longer working as it should. So we have created a network that enables a faster response by organizations on the front line of crises. The START Fund is the first fund supported by multiple donors to be managed exclusively by us, NGOs. Through the START Fund, we can respond faster and earlier to under-the-radar crises, and sometimes even before they hit. We have already delivered assistance to millions of people who may have otherwise been forgotten. The START Fund works like this. Any START network member can raise an alert for a crisis. Within 24 hours, a group of humanitarian experts come together to decide whether the fund should be activated. They base their decision on third-party analysis of the context, a survey of the membership, and the collective experience of the group. If the fund is activated, then any member of the START network can put forward projects for possible funding. Humanitarians in the crisis-hit country then decide which projects to fund based on a robust, independent scoring system. From alert to final selection, it takes less than 72 hours. In the past, we had to wait until a disaster struck before activating the fund. But now, we are opening an anticipation window for the START Fund. This means when we see a crisis coming, we can respond early to mitigate predicted impacts. For instance, ensuring help is already in place before people are forced to leave their homes when escaping violence, or assessing the likely impact of an impending tropical storm on the supply of food The anticipation window will enable us to use forecasting information to make better decisions despite the uncertainty of the situation. We have also created a new interagency network we call Forewarn, which brings together scientists and responders to analyze risks, exchange best practice, and develop new ways to measure the value of early action. The opening of the Start Fund anticipation window means we will enable NGOs to respond earlier, support communities to be resilient to shocks, and help save both lives and costs.
You can go to the next slide, please.
Hi, this is a short tutorial about the TCP sliding window protocol. It starts with what the sliding window protocol is. The sliding
Okay, so that's the Start Fund. It's a multi-donor pooled funding mechanism. It's early, fast, agile, enables localizations, collectively owned. And we have an anticipation window that allows us to deploy resources before a crisis occurs. We've been able to do that because we are a group of organizations. I think it would have been hard for a single organization to go to a donor and ask for a no regrets donation. But because there are 42 organizations together, it creates opportunities that aren't available to single organizations. This is the second opportunity. This is the Bangladesh Fund. So our plans for the network are to change from a single network to a network of networks with national level groups of civil society and commercial firms collaborating around ways to build capacity and finance humanitarian response. So the first national fund is in Bangladesh. It's again supported by DFID. It has a national level committee, and they are performing the same role as the Global Start Fund, but only for Bangladesh context. This enables them to expand the membership, to bring in different donors, to work with, I guess, the essential challenge that we've been arguing in the START network is that there's not enough money in the humanitarian aid system to meet need and to change. You know, we value good NGOs based on how little we spend on overhead. And the size of the humanitarian aid system is small. We spend more on chewing gum. Americans spend more on Halloween. We spend more on yogurt than we do on humanitarian aid. So you have a very small industry with a mandate to be a global safety net, held to low overheads, and there's just no money to invest in changing. We're also stuck in a reactive business model where we need bad news in the front page of the newspaper in order to generate public and political support to get resources to do something about the bad news in the first place. So we're trapped as an industry. We're trapped and stuck. But if we can create different mechanisms that draw in other resources, we can mobilize a different economy around humanitarian aid that can provide us with the money that we need to invest in changing. So that's what we hope will come from national funds, is opportunities for new partnerships and new investors in what NGOs do. Next slide, please. So this is just the advantages to the different stakeholder groups for this type of pooled funding mechanisms. For you know, what the START Fund gives to donors is low transaction costs. So a single relationship to a population of organizations. What it gives to NGOs is delegated authority. Governments give the NGOs in the START network authority to make funding decisions. And then what it gives to people in crises is better alignment in the civil society organizations that are deploying. Next slide, please. How am I doing for time, by the way?
Fine.
2 more minutes. Okay. So based on the START Fund, which is a classic, if you like, it's a classic financial mechanism. It's still a contingency fund. It's still, you know, there is an innovation in that we're deploying resources before in some places, but it's still a reactive fund in the model of the UN managed group funds. But what that Start Fund gives us is a basis to create much more innovative financial mechanisms. So we've adopted a risk financing approach, and we're layering risks. And so some risks may be better financed through insurance. Some risks might be better financed through loans and credit. Now, I'm talking about the hypothetical possibilities, but there are two products that we do have out. In our first transaction in the insurance space will occur next month in Africa. If you go to the next slide. This is called ARC Replica. The schematic will show you how it works. Essentially, the African Union has created a mutual insurance company called ARC, Africa Risk Capacity. But participating countries have taken out insurance against slow onset crises, drought. ARC is also developing other insurance products. For the moment, the first is drought. Now, those countries are developing countries, and they don't have enough money to cover all of the drought risks in their country. But the goal of ARC is for this mutual insurance company to be sustaining, and the governments need to own this. And so donors don't want to, and the countries as well, don't want to give the African governments money so they can pay their own insurance premiums. So what we've done is create something called Replica. So governments take out the insurance policy against drought according to their means, and donor governments supplement those insurance policies through a replica policy, exactly the same as the government insurance policy. And the START network will be the policy holder for the replica. And if the policy is triggered, if the soil moisture content drops below a certain level, then the payout is made to the START network, and we deploy the resources through the same mechanisms as the START Fund. I think that's all I have time for. I can speak in greater length about things and questions, but it's probably enough for now.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we can take more questions if people have more questions about the mechanism, how it works, and maybe how it was created. We can go ahead. Thank you. It was very interesting to see. We heard about the START network and START Fund, so it's good to see how it works. I also like your comparison of the humanitarian aid sector and the chewing-gum industry. I think it's a good way to say to people that we don't give enough. But maybe the fact that we are small make us more innovative. I mean, that's a question for a debate. Thank you. The next speaker will be Aline from Quoits Invest. Aline, the floor is to you.
Hello everyone. So I will do three things today. So I will first speak about Quoits and explain who we are and where we stand within the finance family. Then I will explain how we define innovative finance, and then speak about a few tangible products we have been working on or we are working on. One of them will be discussed in more detail by Buysschaert and Acker. So who we are, Quoits Invest. So we're an impact investing fund. So what that means is that we're a private sector entity, and we invest in activities that are able to generate both a financial return, but also a social or environmental return. And on top of investing, what we also do is that we design products that are able to generate both a financial and a social return. And I think it's important to step back here a bit and understand where impact investing is coming from. Because you have at one extreme what is philanthropy, which is basically money being given for social impact. And at the other end, you have traditional finance, which is basically the finance that's being done on Wall Street. And in between these two extremes, you have various other types of finance, impact investing being one, where you have investors that are prioritizing impact first investors, and are willing to compromise on the return on the investment for that social impact. But you also have investors that are impact investors that are finance first and that are happy to have a social return, but are very much looking for the financial return as well. So basically, there's a spectrum of different types of investors, and so this is very much a growing field. It's been picking up mostly first in the US and the UK, but now it's very much more of a global trend, and putting that into perspective with why we're here today is also that there's a growing humanitarian financing gap. 15 billion from in 2016, and that at the World Humanitarian Summit, basically there was a call for the private sector to contribute towards bridging that humanitarian financing gap through private sector helping in improving delivery systems, but also private sector stepping in financing humanitarian activities. And so this very much leads us to what is innovative finance to us. So it's both bringing additional capital, so it's both more financing, but it's also about increasing the efficiency of existing funding. So it's also about better financing. And how we think about this and what are the tools to achieve these goals is both by innovating in terms of new financial mechanisms, but it's also about thinking about what financial mechanisms are already in place in a more commercial setting, and that could be applicable in other settings such as the humanitarian settings. And I think what is also important to say here is that within innovative finance, there's another type of finance that's called blended finance. Very trendy word, where basically it's about using donor money in a way to attract private capital. So, for example, there might be investments that are too risky, and a donor might provide a guarantee to help private capital invest in settings that are at first too risky for the private sector. And one thing I'd like to say is that we talk about a lot about innovative finance, but one thing that's always important to have in mind, and that we also keep in mind when we advise clients, is that it's always important to start from the financing need and see then what type of products might be relevant to fulfill that need, rather than starting from the product and trying to find the activity that fits the product. Right. Next slide is basically, well, the pictures are missing, but that's fine. So basically at Quoits, we do on the one hand asset management, but we also do innovative finance. And basically there's various instruments we've been working on, and if you go to the next slide, well, I hopefully speaking will do it, and you don't need a graph. But basically, one instrument we have been working on is impact bonds. And so impact bonds can be social impact bonds, development impact bonds, or humanitarian impact bonds. But this is more specifically a mechanism where you have investors providing upfront capital to a service provider, which can be an NGO, to implement a program in the field. And at the end of the program, the success of that program will be evaluated according to metrics that will have been predefined at the outset of the intervention. And according to the success of that intervention, there's outcome funders that generally are donor agencies or foundations, private or public foundations, that will reimburse the investors according to the success achieved. So basically, if the program has not achieved the predefined targets, what happens is that the social investors tend to lose part of all of their capital. However, if the intervention has achieved the targets, outcome funders will reimburse investors with a return that is pro rata of the outcome achieved in the field. And so basically there's various advantages of such mechanism, which is risk externalization. So outcome funders only pay if the targets have been achieved. And it's also the focus on delivery and of achieving these targets is very much highlighted all along the process, given that achieving the targets is what will trigger reimbursement or not. And so the Humanitarian Impact Bond was very much a landmark transaction, in the sense that it was the first time that that mechanism was applied in the humanitarian sphere. I won't say much more about it because we'll talk about the lessons learned after, but I think one of the main reasons also why this transaction could be launched is through the support of the Belgian government from the start, very much from the start of the discussions. And so that mechanism, and maybe the next slide, or the two next slides. The next slide again. So we also have developed, we are actually now developing a development impact bond on livelihoods for Syrian refugees in neighboring countries of Syria, mainly Lebanon and Jordan. So this is very much about professional integration, where social investors will be reimbursed according to the professional integration rates of the target population, so displaced refugees, displaced Syrian people, but also vulnerable local communities. And if you go to the next slide, we also have worked on an impact bond, but here in Brussels, about professional integration of youth with an immigrant background. So basically, that just saying that mechanism can be applied in different settings, and that the Humanitarian Impact Bond and hopefully soon the Refugee Development Impact Bond are examples of that mechanism being applied in a more humanitarian/development setting. And just to also talk about another type of product, because development impact bonds are just one of the innovative finance products. So just talking about a product that we are currently doing a feasibility on, which is a leasing facility for humanitarian organizations. And this is very much started from the observation that displaced people are being displaced for a longer period of time, more and more, and that refugee camps tend to stay for far longer than initially expected. But that humanitarian organizations often have annual budgets and cannot invest in assets that are more sustainable over the long run. And that might be more cost efficient over the long run as well. And in that sense, we, for example, looked at using diesel generators based on diesel versus solar energy plants. And so basically, this is a product about setting up a leasing facility that would help humanitarian organizations pay yearly payments instead of a one high upfront cost, given that's not in line with their budgetary lines that are more annual. So I'll stop here, but happy to answer questions after.
Thank you very much, Aline. I'm sure there are a lot of questions when you start to use fund shelters, blended finance, leasing facility. I think it's great that there is this collaboration between the financial sector and NGOs. And I just want to mention that I know that the Lombard Bank was also involved in that, and we have a representative here as well today who can speak later about this. I will now give the floor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or to the
NGOs, but also international NGOs, international solution. We are now still in the process of defining what these problems could be. If there are any good ideas, please share them with us. Maybe we can take them up in the hackathon later this year. Now, I realize that compared to the other speakers, I have been quite lazy. I have prepared only one slide, and it's lessons learned, and it will structure my dialogue. First of all, maybe I will first say the Humanitarian Impact Bond to make it more concrete. What have we done exactly? We have entered into an agreement with ICRC, and ICRC is supposed to construct, to staff, to equip, and to operate. Sorry. they are already correcting me. No, we will. ICRC has to construct, to staff, to equip, and to operate 3 rehabilitation centers in Africa. One is in Mali, in Mopti. One is in Nigeria. It is in Maiduguri, and one is in Kinshasa, Congo. So difficult environment, and to bring you back to a panel on humanitarian financing, a report prepared by Kristalina Georgieva and her team. And in that report there were 3 chapters. One was on being more efficient and how to bring more efficiency within the humanitarian system. From that came out the Grand Bargain. But there were also 2 other chapters. The first one was on reducing the needs, and there we enter more into the political arena. But the second one was how can we increase the resource base. And in that report she mentioned already an impact bond as an example to increase the resource base for humanitarian financing. So that was in end of 2015 that she came up with that report. It's important increasing the resource base. What did that mean? For us, for Belgium, it meant how can we bring in non-traditional donors into the humanitarian system? And we saw that the impact bond could be an avenue to bring in non-traditional donors. Now, we have realized the impact bond now, and you said 2 years ago, but actually the contracts were signed and concluded August last year, and so that is when we finished the deal. When you look now at the outcome funders, that is the group of donors who at the end will repay the investor. Who are they? Well, it is Belgium, it is DFID, it is Switzerland, it is Italy, and it is a Spanish Caixa, which came in with a little amount. So what do we see? We see mainly traditional donors, and in that sense we haven't succeeded. We haven't succeeded our objective, and we have to be honest about that. That the idea was to bring in non-traditional donors. However, and then I have to counterbalance it a little bit, we realize that we have had a huge demonstration effect, in the sense that last year came out a study of the Brookings Institute, and if you that was specifically on impact bonds, and you see already 30 impact bonds in developing countries, whether that be humanitarian or development. I do not want to go into that discussion. Ours, you could equally call it the development impact bond, because it's more in the development sphere than in the humanitarian sphere. But we have had that huge demonstration effect. Also, we have been contacted frequently by different organizations to share our experiences, of course. We know that now the special envoy for Haiti within the United Nations system is trying to develop an impact bond for stopping the transmission of cholera in Haiti, and she is mounting it for an amount of $50 million. And from the first discussions in which I participated, I could already see that there were a lot of non-traditional donors. The Rockefeller Foundation was there, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were there. So that was a good thing. That is something they can piggyback on our experience, and they can look at what they should do and who they should attract from the start on. So that was my first lessons learned. The second one is impact bonds can create a trade-off between, I say humanitarian and development spending, but I could also say between actual spending and future spending. What are we doing with an impact bond? We are, as a donor, from a donor's perspective, we are front-loading future resources. And we have to realize what that means if you front-load future resources. We all know that we are working in an environment where ODA envelopes are decreasing. So that means that an impact bond or impact bonds, if you have several of them, could affect future development spending or even future humanitarian spending. I would say, to nuance it, impact bonds make sense in environments where you have increasing resource envelopes over time and where you have an idea that conflicts and natural disasters will decrease over time. So in this case, we have to really think about what the impact of the impact bond is. Then, the third one, the third lessons learned, however I put it, try to stick as much as possible to the underlying philosophy of the impact bonds. If you look at the literature of an impact bond, there are clear benefits for all parties involved. And that is also a benefit for the donor. And it is because he has a benefit that he is willing to pay a part of that benefit as a reward to the investor. With this impact bond, we have had huge difficulties in defining what that benefit was for the donor. That does not mean that you cannot find it within the humanitarian system, but for this concrete one, the constructing of the 3 physical rehabilitation centers, it was difficult. But you can think of investments in disaster preparedness, because we know that if we invest in a disaster preparedness intervention, that we will have some savings in the future. We know that in some conflict settings where there are possible conflicts, if we invest in conflict prevention, that it will have some savings in the future. And because you have these savings, you can, of course, justify the fact that you will pay a part of your benefit to the private investor. And then the fifth one is on the transaction cost. Transaction costs with impact bonds are huge. We have been negotiating for almost 2 years the impact bond. And the idea that it is like a bread that you put in the oven and that you can successfully pull out different breads, that is simply not true. You will have to renegotiate time and time again with all the parties involved. I'm glad that Lombardier is there, but there are several investors grouped by Lombardier, of course, and you need to have agreement between all these parties. You need to have an agreement between the investor and ICRC, between the donor and ICRC, with the evaluator and ICRC, with the ones who are going to structure it. So there are a lot of parties involved. So if you want to engage in an impact bond, I would say do it only for a considerable amount. Otherwise, if you have considerable transaction cost and it's only for a small amount, it's not worth. Or if you still want to do it for a small amount, try to limit the number of parties involved as much as possible. Finally, keep the beneficiaries at heart. That is, we have been negotiating and, well, you tend to forget who you are doing this for. Ultimately, it is, of course, people affected by conflict. Those who need protheses, those who need ortheses. But there you are, discussing with investors, discussing with other donors on internal rate of returns, and so on and so on. So keep the beneficiaries at heart. So, am I negative about impact bonds? No. Am I positive? No. It's a balanced picture. Depends on the context. But I think you have to really carefully think about it if you want to go through with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for these very honest lessons learned about the impact bond, because indeed there is a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and a lot of attraction to this kind of tool, and I think it's very important to have the point of view from the different stakeholders, as there are many, and you mentioned we should not forget the beneficiaries are first and who we do that for. So thank you very much. So we spoke about different